Hey guys, in the following video, I'm going to show you how to make chocolate chip cookies. These are pretty basic chocolate chip cookies, but they are delicious. A couple important notes as you watch the video. In this video, I am going to use a KitchenAid mixer. You do not need to use a KitchenAid mixer. You do not need to have a KitchenAid mixer. You can always just bake using a big spoon and a bowl and just stir it. The difference is that your arm is going to probably hurt. It's going to use your muscles. That's a good thing. It's making you stronger. I used to only bake with big bowls and spoons because I thought that using a KitchenAid was cheating. However, once I started baking a lot more and I started doing things like making bread and pizza dough and cookies and sometimes all on the same day, I found that if I just used spoons and bowls, A, I had a lot of dishes to do, and B, by the end of the day, my arms were sore. They hurt. They say that you can tell a baker by their Popeye arms. They have big, strong arms. So I started using the KitchenAid, but it's not cheating. It's just a little bit easier. And I was baking a lot the day that I recorded these videos, so I used the KitchenAid. But if you don't have one, don't worry. You can still do everything that I do in this video, and you're just going to be working that arm a lot more as you're stirring it, which is good. Make you strong. The other important thing that I'm going to mention in the video, and I want to talk about it now, is called mise en place, and it's a French term. It means everything in its place, and it's really important when it comes to baking. I know that seems maybe kind of silly or pretentious, but it's not. You need to get out all your ingredients. You need to measure all your ingredients and have them in nice containers before you actually start mixing anything. The reason for this is when you're in the middle of mixing and you're like, "Oh no, I didn't measure my flour." And you're trying to measure your flour as fast as you can, you're going to make a mistake. And while you're doing that, what you're mixing might be getting overmixed or undermixed because you're not giving it the proper attention. Mise en place is really important when you're cooking or baking. And actually, I believe that a lot of people who say, like, I hate cooking or I don't like cooking or I'm not good at cooking, they just don't measure their ingredients first. If your ingredients are all measured, cooking and baking is actually pretty relaxing. All you're doing is adding stuff and stirring it and heating it. So that's really important. It also makes cleanup a cinch. All your ingredients are already away. You have no danger of knocking over a bag of flour, which I've done, I don't know, a couple dozen times. It really stinks. Um, so if you have all your stuff measured out, that generally doesn't happen. And you can just take your bowls, stick them in the dishwasher, stick them in your sink, and be done. And the last thing that I want to tell you about is that baking is a science. I'm sure Miss Gillis would back me up on this. Just cooking food, is more of an art. You have to be really attentive to what's going on. You have to adjust your heat. You have to adjust your salt levels, all that kind of stuff while you're cooking. When you're baking, it's not like that. It's like a lab. You measure things very carefully and you make sure that you use proper measurement technique, and it uses a lot of math. So the recipe that I am posting for you guys is actually a conversion of a recipe I've used in the past, and I halved the recipe. So I had to have the fractions. I had to have the whole numbers. This is all division. And then I had to know the best way to measure them, which I'm going to give you a demonstration of. So again, the three things. You do not need the fancy gadget that I use in this video. You can use a big spoon in a bowl if you want, though the gadget does help. It does make it easier on your arm. 2, make sure you measure out all your ingredients before you start baking and put everything you can away while you're baking. Keep your area clean. You'll be happy because when you're done baking, it won't be a big headache. And then 3, baking is more of an art than a science. So make sure that baking is more a science than an art. Once you do all this, you're free to enjoy the best part of baking, which is that when you're done, you have this awesome finished product. Your kitchen smells amazing, and you get to eat dessert for a couple days. So the other thing I really enjoy about baking is giving baked treats to other people. I find, and you might find this surprising, that it's difficult to eat 24 cookies myself. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put like 6 cookies in a bag and I'll go take it to my neighbor and drop it off for them. So enjoy. I hope you enjoy this Alex reward. You guys earned it. And if you have other ideas for rewards, you want to see me bake something, you want me to show you how to cook something, I can really cook or bake just about anything you want to know how to bake or cook. I'm really into that stuff. So I can also show you some music stuff. I can show you some video game stuff. There's all kinds of stuff I could do for a reward. I bet you guys will come up with more ideas than I could on my own. So hope you enjoyed this video.
Hey gang, Mr. Toft here with my assistant Lily. What are we doing today? Baking chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah, we're baking chocolate chip cookies. So the first thing you need to remember when you're baking chocolate chip cookies is you gotta get your butter out.
Yeah.
Get your butter out the day before. It should be room temperature so it's nice and soft. Check this out. You can squish it. Needs to be room temperature, all right? First thing. Then you gotta get out the rest of your ingredients. Second thing you have to do when you're baking, hey Lily. The second thing you're doing when you're baking is you have to get out all your ingredients and measure them at one time. This is called mise en place. It's a French term. It means everything in its place. And whenever you're baking or cooking, you should get everything measured in its place before you do anything else. I know that seems crazy, but that's what you do. So let's get to it. Another pro tip, always make sure that your oven is preset and heating up before you start mixing up ingredients. There's nothing worse than being done mixing ingredients and having to wait for your oven to heat up. My assistant is over here playing with flour. That's one of her favorite things to do. Now, the next thing you need to do, when you measure flour, you should always be using a baking scale. Baking scales are super important for baking. You should make sure your scale is zeroed by hitting this button right here. Turns to 0. And we measure our flour by weight. Always measure flour by weight, not by volume. Check it out. We're going for 6 ounces. This weight is going to give us a far more accurate amount of flour than if we put it in cups, because if we put it in cups it gets kind of mashed down and you don't know if you have a mashed cup or if you have a loose cup. So if you do it by weight, you know you have the exact right amount. A little bit more. Come on, we're going for 6. We're at 5 96/100. Come on, buddy. There we go. Perfect 6 ounces of flour. Now, my assistant keeps continuing to play with flour. I have measured the rest of my dry ingredients into this bowl. That's the baking powder and the baking soda. Usually recipes say to sift these ingredients, but you can just take a quick whisk and now they're sifted. All you're doing is breaking the flour into tinier particles.
I've got my chef's hat on your bacon.
Oh no! Better get your chef's hat. Now, as my assistant continues to sift flour, notice that what I've done, I've put away all the ingredients that I've measured and used. You should always do that as you go along, and that way when you're done baking, you don't have a big mess to clean up. We're gonna have a bit of a mess no matter what, but you know, hazards. Now, my assistant has her chef's hat on now. She's ready to go. One thing I wanted to show you, I'm measuring sugar. I don't know if you can see there. I always try to under-measure sugar a little bit. In my opinion, most American baking recipes are too sweet. Go ahead and pour it in, chef. Thank you. So I always undershoot just a hair to make sure that your final product isn't going to be sickly sweet. Now, my assistant and I have finished measuring out ingredients for the egg and vanilla extract in the bowl. I put an egg in a bowl so I can pick out shells in case shells fall into it. I always over measure on chocolate chip cookies, chocolate chips, because if your assistants are anything like mine, they try to eat chocolate chips while you're baking. And so, now that we're all measured out, notice I've already put all my ingredients away, so that way I don't have to clean them up at the end. Now, the last thing you want to do, and this seems crazy to some of you, before you start baking, you're going to clean up. This is called a bench knife. You see, it helps you get flour off the counter. So we're scraping this up so that our area is nice and clean before we get started on our actual mixing. All right, my assistant's covering her ears because this sounds scarcer, but we're going to start creaming the sugar and butter. All right, assistant, you want to help or you want Daddy to do it?
I'm going to do it.
All right. We're going to put it on about medium high. This is where I lose my assistant. She doesn't like the noise. So, you need to cream this together. That means it's going to turn into a uniform kind of goop, and it's going to start turning into a lighter color. All right, this is an old school KitchenAid. But we're going to do this for a couple minutes. Now, we've been going for about a minute, and if you look and see, it's starting to become a bit of a uniform goop. And it's starting to turn a lighter color. That's what we're going for, but we're still going to keep going. Okay, we're getting ready to turn off here. And we're going to lower our bowl, and we're going to use our spatula, and we're going to just kind of get some of this that's been stuck off the bowl, off the edge of the bowl, because we're about to add our eggs and vanilla, and we want to make sure that this isn't going to continue to stick. So, we're off. I always rub my spatula here on the beaters. This is not the time to lick your spatula, that's the end, so save it. Now we're going to add our egg and vanilla. And we're just gonna mix this very lightly. We don't wanna mix it too much because egg will start to whip up into some air and that will make it a little bit too fluffy and your cookies will fall. So we just put it on low, give it just a second. See the egg starting to mix in, the vanilla extract starting to mix in. Not yet, bud. We can have chocolate chips in a minute. Lily's eating all of her chocolate chips. We give it a quick blitz. Again, we do not want to overmix because we don't want too much air in it. Now, see, it's pretty uniform, so we're going to start adding our dry ingredients. Now, we're adding in our dry ingredients. Usually you add your dry ingredients in a little bit at a time. The reason for that is when you turn this on, they're going to poof up. Watch. Poof. So that keeps it from poofing too much. You just kind of mix it for just a second. It's mixed in enough. Now we add the rest of our dry ingredients. You're excused, bud. And one more blitz, and then our cookies are going to come together. This is our favorite part, as you can see. Now, this is our cookie dough. We're going to lower the mixer while it's mixing. I give it a quick blitz to get the rest of the cookie dough off. Scares Lily a little bit. Now we are going to detach our paddle. This is called the paddle attachment. And this is a part where you're going to want to scrape this paddle into the bowl so you get as much cookie as possible. Now you can see my assistant's enjoying the baking paddle. You want to give this a quick stir with a spatula before you mix in the chocolate chips. The reason is you might have some bits that didn't quite get mixed in by the mixer. And now the best part, mixing in the chocolate chips. Boop. We're going to stir these up. See, Lily's got Lily's full attention now. Now my assistant continues to lick the paddle. Notice I just mixed these a little bit. I don't want them to be overmixed, so you just mix it so the chocolate chips are pretty uniform throughout. Also notice my area is clean. I've been putting away my ingredients as I go, which is by far the best call, so that way when you're done baking cookies, you don't have this giant mess to clean up. It's key. Now, this next step is optional, but we're going to do it anyway. We have here, this is called baking parchment. You do not need to use baking parchment. You do not need to use baking parchment. It just means that you don't have to clean up the pans when you're done. So we're going to trace an outline of the baking parchment around our pans, and then I'm going to cut it out, and I'm going to use, yes? What's up, bud?
Me.
You?
My hand.
Oh, are you going to put your hand on there?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to trace an outline of our baking parchment, and then we're going to cut it out, and we're going to use that piece we cut out as a template to cut out more pieces. Now, this recipe that I'm going to post is going to be making about 24 cookies. So here's my baking parchment template I was talking about. I'm just going to cut out 3 other sheets of parchment paper right around this piece, and that will leave me with 4, and that'll make it really easy for me to bake my cookies. Now, I've lost my assistant. She usually gets bored around this point when she can't actually eat chocolate chips. So here's our last step. We're going to scoop these cookies from here and put them on here. Now, why do I use a tablespoon measure? I used to think it didn't matter. I used to use a regular spoon. I used to use my hands. The reason that you measure cookies when you put them on here is not so they're small. It's so that they're all the same size. If the cookies are different sizes, they're going to bake improperly. Some are going to get really hard and finish, and some are going to be underdone. We want them to all be the same size so they all finish at the same time. Now, notice that I've scooped out my cookies. Another thing to notice is I've only put 6 cookies on this baking sheet. You could certainly fit a bunch more, but you do not want to crowd cookies. You want them to have a lot of room to spread as they cook, and you don't want them to touch one another. And now we put our cookies in the oven. Open quickly, work really fast. The faster the better. I would normally do this much faster because I wouldn't be holding my phone. The more you hold the oven open, the less temperature it's going to have that's going to be the temperature you want. So now we're in, now we wait. Set a timer.
Look at me, Dad. Look at me, Dad.
Lily is wearing my shoes. Hey, Lil. Now, while we're waiting for our cookies to continue baking, we can measure out all our other cookies and get them ready, and that way we can throw them in when they're done. Now, in an earlier video, I told you that this made 24 cookies. So if you're keeping track at home, a dozen's 12. So what's 12 times 2? It's 24. And notice that I'm putting 6 cookies on each baking sheet. So how many baking sheets did I need? And how did I calculate that? I did 12 divided by 6, and I got 4 sheets of parchment paper. So we use math all the time when we're baking, not just measuring. While our cookies are baking, we're going to set up our cooling area. Now, this seems like a silly area to have to, set up, but you actually do need to set it up because when cookies are cooling, they're actually continuing to bake. So the cooling process is actually very important. If you've ever tried to eat a cookie while it's still cooling, you know it doesn't work very well. It falls apart, burns the heck out of your mouth. So make sure you cool. So my cookies have cooled for a couple minutes. Now, notice what I was looking for when I pulled them out. I want the outside to be a little bit brown and the inside to still be a light color. These are actually a pinch overdone, but we're not going to be too worried about it. Now that they're done cooling, we're going to slide the parchment. See that? And I don't even need to wash my pan because I use the parchment paper. I'm going to slide my parchment onto the wire rack. I didn't expertly slide it. And then we're going to load up our next pan. Now, once our cookies are finished cooling, we can move them off of our parchment paper and then discard it. And you want to make sure you have enough room for them to spread out. If they get too close together and they're too warm, they will continue to melt the chocolate. I usually use a much larger cooling rack, but I happen to have an Easter brisket sitting on top of it. So we're using the small cookie cooling racks. And now it's time to dig into a cookie. Hey, assistant. You putting on a glove?
So.
Here, you want a cookie?
Yep.
It's all yours, my friend. Enjoy. Still warm. That's when they're best. What do you think, Lily? Is it good?
It's good.
You like it? Okay, good.